Welcome to the June monthly market report. I'm excited to get started right now. There's a lot happening in real estate. We're going to talk about prices and sort of what's happening there. Start off with inventory because that's driving up, and that is having an impact on prices. And we'll talk about expired listings. I was on the phone with my friend Curtis Finn from REDX. REDX is showing expired listings rising by almost 20% year to date, compared to last year. And so that's an important thing we want to pay attention to as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the June monthly market report. All right, I'm going to start off with this quote here from Daniel Hale. The number of homes for sale is rising in many markets, giving shoppers more choices than they've had in years, and sellers are becoming more flexible on pricing. That's a good thing, underscored by the price reductions we're seeing. And while mortgage rates are certainly weighing on demand, higher mortgage rates, the silver lining is that the market is starting to rebalance, and this could create opportunities for buyers who are prepared. There is no doubt right now that we are seeing inventory rise. We're seeing that have an impact on the market. Sellers need to, sort of be aware of that and what's happening. I think the best way to maybe explain this is this graphic right here that we've used before. And listen, the headline of this says that all inventory has topped 1 million active listings for the first time since the winter of 2019. That's a big number. And, I sort of think about this graphic. If you take the sort of darker bars right here, those are the last three, what I would call the last three normal years in real estate. You look across here, and that's 17, 18, and 19. The red bar is the dividing line in a lot of cases, the year of the pandemic, 2020. Then you see a 5-year cycle of inventory depletion, 21, 22, 23, 24, and sort of the recovery of that. And then we lay in right up until May this year, and you see kind of crossing the line of 2020. We talked about this a couple of months ago in the monthly market report, where we'll likely end this year in a place that's very similar to where we ended 2017 and 2018. It just gives you a good visual picture of what's happening with inventory in this country right now. And so we want to pay attention to that. But the reality right now is no two markets or even two regions are the same. This is a look at where inventory is growing maybe the fastest and is still lagging behind. The way you read this graphic is the blue bars show inventory growth year over year. So if we take an example, the far left there, the Midwest, 22, almost 23% inventory growth year over year, but still down 41% from pre-pandemic levels. So Midwest and Northeast still considerably down from pre-pandemic levels. And then you kind of switch to the South and the West, both growing year over year, but both above pre-pandemic levels. So more inventory right now in the South and the West than what we saw, prior to 2020. That's an important sort of aspect to pay attention to. Depending on where you're at in the country, you're certainly familiar with that and certainly familiar with your market. But I think this gives you an idea of what's happening in the residential real estate market in this country right now. Logan Motashabi from Housing Wire said this: the increase in inventory is also promising and supports long-term stability in the housing market. Agree 1,000%. As wages rise and households are formed through marriage and dual incomes, this influx of inventory returning to normal levels provides an optimistic outlook. So let's pause for a second here. Rising inventory across the country coming out of the last 5 years. And certainly we can say the last, several years, 21, 22, unhealthy. Then we've seen, higher mortgage rates impact 23 and 24. Here we sit today. And sort of returning to this more balanced market, affordability being a challenge. But I want to draw out a couple of things. First of all, the reality of the market that we sit in is very different than the last several years. It's been anything other than normal. We know that. But this is a really good look from the census and realtor.com of the cumulative housing deficit or surplus going all the way back to 2012. So what you see is 2012 on the left there, and sort of this bounce around from deficit to surplus to deficit to surplus, maybe being even there in 2017, but kind of starting in 2018 on, we have this housing deficit. And we know the reason for that, right? Builders didn't keep up with with construction post 2008, we don't have the number of homes that we need in this country. Everybody wants to buy. Low mortgage rates come in, and we know the story of that. But we're certainly, if 2023 was sort of the bottom of the deficit, we're coming out. I think we'll look at 2025, and that that red bar will be a lot shorter. Realtor.com said this, at the 2024 rate of consumption, it would take 7.5 years to close the housing gap. Now, I'm not here today to say it's going to take 7.5 or shorter or longer, but what I'm saying is we still have a deficit in this country. A lot of headlines saying right now there are more sellers than buyers and all of those things. The thing that's weighing in, the headwind that's weighing in, obviously, is affordability, but we're still undersupplied in this country. That is an important thing to keep in mind. But as inventory rises in just about every market, it's having an impact on prices. Home prices across the country are impacted. And I think the bottom line is pricing a home right is critical in today's market. I'm going to break down a couple of surveys that we're seeing. I hope they're ones that maybe you or somebody on your team can use at maybe a listing presentation even, or maybe you have a seller that you're working with right now and it's kind of sat on the market. I talked about rising expired listings in this country right now. But this is a survey from Realtor.com where 8 in 10 potential home sellers think they will get their asking price or more. Okay, so you have 80% of sellers are like, absolutely, we'll get this asking price or more, maybe tied to something in the rearview mirror, a price or sort of a circumstance in the market that they're like, okay, we'll definitely get that. Well, the reality is, from the National Association of Realtors, 4 out of 10 sold their home for less than their asking price. Okay, so you have this kind of variance of people are selling for less of the asking price, and that's important to remember. Also from NAR, 1/3 of sellers had to reduce their asking price. And so I'm going to break this down by state in just a minute. But what we know is price reductions are happening. Listings are expiring. That is all an impact or a byproduct of what we're seeing right now in the market and growing inventory levels. It's having a massive impact. If we break this down even further, all over the country, price reductions have happened, right? A couple of years ago, you didn't have to reduce the price of a listing because everything would sell so quickly. But if we sort of break this down real quick, Texas, 23% of the active listings in the month of May had a reduction, 18% in California, 21% in Georgia, 24% in Florida. You see them all over the country. Price reductions are happening. It's because of an unrealistic maybe mindset or thought process from the seller. Danielle Hale said this: the rising share of price reductions suggests that a lot of sellers are anchored to prices that aren't realistic in today's housing market. Today's sellers would be wise to listen to feedback they're getting from the market. We posted a lot of content, about this at KCM. I'm going to show a couple of things in just a few minutes that'll give you a way to communicate this to sellers. But I think right now, having a direct and honest conversation with a seller about pricing is going to be one of the most important things. Redfin said this: sellers are pricing higher based on comps from the past rather than current demand. Today's list price growth is accelerating while sales price growth is decelerating. Let me say that again. List price growth is accelerating while sales price growth is decelerating. Back in 2020, both were up and to the right or accelerating. Now, let me give you a way to show this visually. This is a look at the median sales price and the median asking price charted over time. It goes all the way back to the beginning of 2021. What you see is they sort of travel in tandem or in this sort of symbiotic relationship. But what's happened the last several months? Median asking price has gone up dramatically while median sales price has not. See that gap, forming this gap right here. I would be using this graphic right now in any listing presentation that I do, to show, hey, listen, people are listing their homes much higher. They're expiring. We'll talk about that in a minute. And we have the data to prove it. That's why pricing something right is critically important right now. And you have the facts to support your conversation when you sit down with somebody. Redfin said this: when buyers and sellers are on different planets, one side eventually has to give in. And it's looking like it's going to be sellers this time. Rising inventory and price drops and seller concessions indicate this is already starting to happen, and sales price growth will likely continue to slow as a result. Listen, I can't say enough about this. Homes.com said the best way to determine your selling price is to talk with an expert and get a pulse on the market. Remember to consider the differences between your home and what others recently sold for. Be realistic about your home and what the market could net you based on its condition. This is the professionals market. This is the time to come in and say, look, here's what I'm seeing in the market, and here's how we're going to navigate it. Because if you don't have that honest conversation, maybe they say, we think the home's worth this, and it's not, we end up with an expired listing. Okay, so I want to maybe break this down for just a few minutes and give you a state of expired listings right now. I do believe in the market. This is a strategy. If you're not working expired listings, please pay attention to this. It may be a strategy you want to start to look at. Listen, our friends at RedX do a phenomenal job, and I'm going to break down a lot of their data they've given us on what's happening in the expired market. But how do I want to communicate this? There are a couple things that I would say are important for any buyer and any seller to maybe understand right now. Days on market across the country are rising. This is a look at the median days on market in May of each year, going back to 2021. So what you see is this gradual rise of days on market. Now, you could go into your MLS, you could go into information you have locally, you go into KCM Local and look at that and say, okay, what's happening in my market right now relative to days on market? But nationally, we can tell days on market is rising. We can also tell, and we know, I just covered it, inventory is rising. Let's look at May of each year, going back to 2021, the active listing counts in the month of May. We mentioned we just crossed over 1 million active listings in this country. So days on market rising, active listings rising. And what's the third thing we know? Existing home sales are down. So the velocity of transactions, certainly not what it was back in 21, 22, and has fallen largely due to the headwinds of affordability and all the things we know about uncertainty in the economy and people, wondering what's ahead and should I buy a home right now and all of those things. And when you get those, it's a formula for expired listings. Days on market rising, inventory rising, and sales down equal expired listings. So if a home's not priced right, it expires. Got a lot of phenomenal data on this. I mentioned I was on the phone with Curtis Finn, who is the CEO, president of RedX, again, phenomenal company. He said this to me, shot me an email. Expired listings are up 17.6% when comparing January through May of 2025 with the same time frame in 2024. Trends look like we could end the year as high as 20% more than last year. So it makes sense. It makes sense that a listing would expire given sort of the current climate of what's happening in real estate. Now, I think right now, I think we want to be able to communicate this well and understand the implications of an expired listing. I mentioned it was a strategy, I believe, that if you're not using it, or you're not reaching out to expired listings, you need to be. So let's kind of break this down. More than a third of the listings that expire between May of last year, May of this year, have relisted. Okay, 37.8. You see there in the green bar of the listings that expired, canceled, or withdrawn. About a third have relisted so far. Okay, so some people just gave up. Some people said, okay, we want to sell the home. Of those that were relisted, 70% are sold. Okay, 30% didn't sell. If you're going to sell your house, you want to get it relisted. That makes sense. We get that, right? Now, what did they then do? This is where I love the information that RedX brings us. Most sellers at that point relisted at a lower price. Okay, again, this is this year, January through May. Of the sellers who relisted at 40% relisted at a lower price. 37.3, you see if they're at the same price. Some went to a higher price. Okay, that's very interesting, but most were at the same price or a little bit lower. The ones that relisted sold at a lower price. Again, this is not rocket science, I don't think, but it is the facts and it is the data that you can share with somebody if you're having this conversation. Listen, with a listing that you have right now or one that you're going to sit down with that expires. 68.4, the green portion here, sold lower than the expired price. Okay. So having an honest conversation right now about price is critical. You know, one of the things that I love about being able to get all this information from REDX is they also did a little bit of compilation of the expired calls in their system. And you may have heard me say this before, that they gave us the information. The number one emotion that somebody feels when they're listing or their home doesn't sell, when their listing expires, is embarrassment. You know, I've told their family, they've told friends, we're going to sell the house, and then it doesn't happen. They then feel embarrassed. So if we can come in as the solution provider, then we can help them ultimately accomplish their goal, and through that accomplish our goals. Listen, we're all in this business to accomplish our goals, but I think we can really help people right now, bringing them some of the facts. I'll wrap with this with REDX. A lot of these homeowners are still interested in selling, but what they need is an agent who can address their concern, offer a new strategy, and guide them through a better selling experience. If you understand their mindset and address those concerns, these leads will be more likely to list with you. You know, I think you take the same house, a new strategy, and you get a different result. That is the truth right now about expired listings. I want to give you a resource here as we wrap up the monthly market report. You know, we've spent a lot of time kind of understanding the expired piece. And, you know, at the end of the day, the seller has 4 options when their listing expires. They can relist with the current agent, and maybe you're listening to the monthly market report and you have a listing that's going to expire. They could relist with a new agent. You don't want that. Or if you are a new agent, you do want that to step in. They could take the house off the market, or they could then list it as a for sale by owner. All of those are the things that are sort of on the purview of a potential seller right now as they navigate this market. But I do believe there are 3 specific steps to winning expired listings. You know, first of all, you have to understand what the seller is going through, mastering their psychology of just what they feel. I mentioned the REDX survey and how they said the number one emotion that folks feel is embarrassment, right? You have to understand that they have this reaction formation of why didn't our home sell, and maybe disappointed. Maybe they take out their frustrations on you versus the other agent. And then you have to take a look at it and give good, honest feedback. Step 2 there, the factors that may have prevented the home from selling. Proper access looking good. And 3, pricing it compelling. You know, we always say if the price is not compelling, it's not selling in this market. So we're going to give great advice, and then I want to really understand their 4 options and where they see themselves going. So let me give that to you. It's in the member area. The 3 steps to winning an expired listing. Go grab that. If you haven't read that recently, do it, because I believe this summer, this will be something that will be an opportunity in just about every market. Just about everybody will have the chance to talk with and maybe help sellers that have a listing that's expired navigate this market. So that is a good thing. You know, as always on the monthly market report, we want to do all of this because we believe most agents know what's happening. We believe good agents understand it, but only the great agents can explain what's happening. My hope is that through all this information, you can explain what's happening with prices, you can explain what's happening with inventory, you can explain what's happening with expired listings so that you can give the best advice and help people navigate this real estate market. So thank you for that, and we'll see you back next month on the monthly market report.